I'm going to introduce you all to Tony Spaniola. Very cool person, first of all, but I'll give you all his qualifications and such. So Tony is a leading national advocate for PFAS-infected families and communities. He learned in 2016 that his cottage in Oscoda was impacted by PFAS contamination from the former Whitmer Air Force Base. And it was the first reported PFAS site in Michigan and the first reported U.S. military PFAS site in the world. So in his response, Tony has catalyzed action on local, state, and federal levels to address these harmful forever chemicals. Among his projects, Tony co-founded the Need Our Water Community Action Group in Oscoda. He co-founded and co-chairs the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network, which is doing a ton of stuff policy-wise in Michigan right now across the Great Lakes. And he serves on the leadership team of the National PFAS Contamination Coalition. He also serves as a consultant to the Pulitzer Prize winner Sarah Ganim in her critically acclaimed PFAS film, PFAS documentary, No Defense, the U.S. military's war on water. So I'm going to pass it over to Tony, and we're going to get into some conversation and such. Hey, Tony.
Hey, thank you. And thank you all for coming today. I wish I could be there in person, but I have a job that requires me to be on the other side of the state this morning. And so it's great to see you all. It's great to be with at a convening with my friends at Freshwater Future. I was able to do one of these in person in Flint back in 2019, before the world all changed and COVID and all those things hit when and made virtual meetings possible. What I would like to do, and we can maybe have a discussion as we're going forward, but let me maybe just give you kind of an overview of PFAS and a sort of a description of how it's impacted me and my community and what we've done as a result, and ramifications, which are incredibly widespread and broad, and maybe share with you a little bit of our kind of David and Goliath story in Oscoda, which is where my second home is located, and it's a community there that is it's a very poor community. We have many people who we have many homeless folks. We have many people living below the poverty line, and in Oscoda, I've done a lot of work with folks in Flint and Detroit because we have so many things in common. And one of the things that I've tried to really work on in my advocacy is to break down the barriers of geography and race and economic classification to bring us all together. Because in my view, as a student of history and politics, over the centuries in this country, the wealthy influences have attempted to divide those who live at the lower end of the spectrum based on race. They played the race card. And for me, growing up, my father was in the state legislature, and I had I guess it was an interesting experience, I thought at the time, to live the PBB crisis in Michigan back in in the 1970s and 80s. I'll show you my age a little bit. I was a teenager then, and I learned just how terrible the system of protecting people from contaminants is. And when I went through that with him as a young man, it was a real eye-opener for me. And if any of you are old enough to remember it, it was one of the biggest political upheavals I think I've ever seen in the state of Michigan. Grocery stores were putting up signs saying, we don't sell Michigan produce, we don't sell Michigan milk. There were recall efforts against Governor Milliken. It was just unbelievably incredible. And my father, who spearheaded this whole thing, we would have the New York Times would show up at our house, the news, all the national news media, and it was so big, bad, and horrible that I thought, in my own naive way, that I would never see anything like it again. Well, I was dead wrong. And what happened to me was in 2016, I received a letter from the health department saying, you can't drink your water. And I suspect there are some of you who may know what that feels like. To learn, to get that information, to realize and find out that they knew for many, many years that there was a problem and never told us. To think about all of the health impacts, the adverse health impacts that could have been prevented if they would have told us what they knew when they knew it. It was just an outrageous situation, and one, again, I think some of you can relate to this. When you're told you can't drink your water, that just so impacts your life. I mean, it's just, you have to rethink everything about what you do, how you live. Just an incredible personal situation for me. And I remember sitting in my very first meeting as they were explaining this to us with my father, and the roles were reversed. When he was spearheading his thing, I would kind of go along and listen in and offer my thoughts and insights. And now he was doing that with me. And what we've learned is just since then is so, I mean, it makes PBB look like a minor little thing. This is so broad, so widespread, and so harmful that it's shocking. So with that as a preface, let me just start by telling you a little bit about PFAS. Some of you may know already, but let me just share with you a little bit about it, and then I'll kind of go into our story, how it impacts us in Michigan and the Great Lakes, and communities around the state. But so PFAS, it's an acronym that stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And what that means, it's not one chemical. It is an entire class of chemicals. And I'm not a scientist, but my understanding is that the basic premise of PFAS chemicals is that they bond the fluorine and carbon atoms. And what that does, it creates a bond that is virtually indestructible. And it also creates a type of chemical that lasts that they're called forever chemicals for a reason. They last a long time. One of the examples that I've heard is that I have a grandson who's 1 year old. And if he ingests PFAS today, which he probably is, by the way, we all are, 98% of us have it in our blood. But if he ingests one particular PFAS chemical today, a very common one, he's likely to still have remnants of that in his bloodstream when he's 60 years old. That's how long these chemicals last. And the two chemicals in this class of thousands, every time I hear a new number, it gets bigger. I've heard 11,000, I've heard over 100,000, I've heard as many as 1 million different variations. We don't know because it's all, protected information, confidential information that isn't being shared with us. It is stunning. And I can tell you that when I first learned, a young lawyer offered to volunteer to help me figure this all out. And about 3 weeks into it, she called me. She was a mom with a young child. And so she would put her child to bed, do the research at night, and then write her stuff up and send it to me. And she called me one night. It was, 10 o'clock at night, just sobbing. And she said, Tony, there is no end to this. It is so bad. It is so horrible. I can't believe it. I keep thinking I'm going to find, okay, it stops here. No, it doesn't. So as I said, it's a class of chemicals. The two chemicals that are most known in this class are called PFOA and PFOS. To simplify that, and I'll try to stay away from acronyms in this as much as I can. The PFOA chemical is the Teflon chemical used in Teflon pans. The PFOS is a chemical used in things like Scotchgard, to waterproof shoes and that sort of thing. And there's again a whole bunch of other ones, but PFAS chemicals have been in my community were used in firefighting foam. In the late 1960s, there was a terrible aircraft carrier fire on the USS Forrestal. 168 service members died. It was the worst disaster in a military operation since World War II. And so the Defense Department went to 3M and said, help us make a fire extinguishing chemical that will put out a fire in 1 minute. And so they came up with this. It's called AFFF. I'm doing it again. It's called aqueous film forming foam, but it's a foam that can put out a fire, very, very, very quickly. The problem is it's loaded with PFAS chemicals, and I mean loaded with many, many different types of it. So we have PFAS chemicals in firefighting foam. We have PFAS chemicals in like repellents, Scotch Guard, your stain-proof clothing, and then the part I'm about to tell you gets really freaky because it's in things like makeup, various cosmetics, dental floss, pizza boxes, fast food wrappers. It's even been found in antidepressants, like prescriptions with antidepressants. It is stunning. It is widespread, and it is very, very toxic at extremely low levels. We do not regulate any PFAS chemicals in the United States nationally at all. In Michigan, we have drinking water standards for 7 PFAS chemicals that went into effect in 2020, and those have been challenged by 3M and have been struck down by the Michigan Court of Appeals. The regulation is currently going to go before the Michigan Supreme Court. It is in effect. That's the good news. It's remaining in effect. It pertains to 6 PFAS chemicals, and for PFOA, I'll just give you that one. The regulation in Michigan is 6 parts per trillion. Now, 1 part per trillion is something like a dropper, 1 drop of the chemical in like an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So it's very, very small. The United States Environmental Protection Agency last year came out with an announcement essentially saying that there are no safe levels of PFOA or PFOS at all. And the EPA, I'm going to give some credit to the Biden administration here, but the EPA is now proposing a national drinking water standard effectively at the lowest detectable legal limit of 4 parts per trillion for those 2 chemicals and a couple of others. But those regulations are, working their way through the process. PFAS chemicals have been linked to cancers, thyroid cancer, kidney disease, developmental issues, and it's particularly troubling in children. It passes through the placenta to infants in the womb, and it has been shown to have adverse immunological effects. So in other words, like vaccines for little kids don't work as well if the kids have been contaminated with PFAS. We've seen, and this is more anecdotally, we've seen that in communities with high PFAS exposure, the COVID vaccine didn't work as well. There were higher incidents of COVID in those areas. Again, those are things that are all kind of playing out. But these chemicals have been used. They were first developed in connection with the Manhattan Project way back in the 1930s and 40s, and were used by DuPont to make the Teflon pans for years and years and years and years. And what we've seen in documentaries and other information that's been released is that they knew that these chemicals were harmful. They were making massive, massive, massive profits and continued to use them. And what they also did is they duped the scientific community into believing that the chemicals were harmless for many, many, many years. And it took finally a farmer in Parkersburg, West Virginia, whose farm was next to a DuPont landfill, who realized that his cattle were dying, and they were drinking from a stream, that flowed from that landfill site onto his property. And they're just gruesome pictures of these cattle. But the farmer essentially said, wait a minute, this is coming from that landfill. He was told that he didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know what he was taught. You know the drill, but it's the same playbook that we hear in so many of these environmental cases. He stuck with it. He found a lawyer who would take his case, and they blew the thing wide open in a lawsuit down in Parkersburg, West Virginia, which resulted in the largest epidemiological study in the history of the world. They tested 70,000 people in Parkersburg, West Virginia over a period of 8 years, and developed and found these links between PFOA and some of the things I mentioned to you earlier: thyroid disease, the cancers, kidney cancer, testicular cancer, ulcerative colitis, high cholesterol, and there's a couple others. But the bottom line is these are really bad chemicals. And to share with you a little bit of my personal involvement, Oscoda, Michigan is in Northeast Michigan on Lake Huron, and we have the former, and in the Huron National Forest, we have the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base there, which closed in 1993, and they use PFAS chemicals virtually every day in training sessions, sprayed them all over the place. And worst of all, they sprayed them on little kids. They thought the firefighters thought that they were harmless, and they would have the little kids come out and they would have foam days, and they would spray them. They would wash their cars in it. And of course, we're now seeing in the veterans population very high, all sorts of very troubling health issues, which sadly the Veterans Administration, it's not going to surprise you, the Veterans Administration is denying. Oscoda, Michigan is the first PFAS site in Michigan and the first U.S. military PFAS site in the world. The contamination was discovered there in 2010. And a scientist, and again, this is not going to surprise you, a scientist from the DEQ, a really good man, found these chemicals, started doing research, wrote a paper, a 93-page scientific paper that he took to the director of the DEQ, the same DEQ director who presided over the Flint water crisis. He took that paper to the director and said, we have a massive problem. It's going to be everywhere in our state, and we need to do something because it's impacting health, and it's going to be a major, major, major problem. It's not going to surprise you to hear that the director of the DEQ did nothing with that report. It sat in his desk. So in 2010, they made this discovery. The U.S. military, by the way, is the largest known and worst PFAS polluter in the United States. There are now over 700 places just like Oscoda all around the country. And they don't like having to spend money on protecting people from from toxins. They would rather spend money, making war. And so they view this as a threat to their mission and have essentially played down the problem and tried to deny it for many, many years. But in Oscoda in 2012, now this is 11 years ago, we had the first in the country, the first do not eat fish advisory for a 9-mile stretch of the Asabo River. You can't eat a single fish. One fish is harmful. We have some of the most contaminated fish in the world there. Since then, there's been a total of 5 public health warnings issued for our community. The fish advisory is one. And as you can imagine, because we have people living, below the poverty line, many people rely on fish and hunting in order to sustain themselves, particularly through the winters. So when they told us in 2018 that you should not eat any venison, this is a wildlife area, right? No venison for a 3.5-mile radius around the base, unsafe to eat. That was the first do not eat venison advisory in the United States. A year later, do not eat small game and semi-aquatic wildlife. The first do not eat advisory like that in all of the United States. In 2016, as I mentioned, I'm jumping around, we were told we couldn't drink our residential well water. And that was the first PFAS drinking water warning in the state of Michigan. And then in 2017, you can see a little picture behind me, and I may go to the slides here in just a second, but this foam that you see behind me here is contaminated PFAS foam. That's in my backyard. And we were originally told, again, this is not going to shock you, but we were initially told that this foam was safe even for children to swallow and ingest. That was by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Some of us said, whoa, I mean, what are you guys thinking? This makes no sense whatsoever. I think it was earlier mentioned, this film that we've done about Oscoda, I'll talk to you about it. It's all covered in that film, but we in the community rose up. And I think you can imagine as you start to see things like this, and if you want to pull up the first slide, I can show you some other examples. This catalyzed our community. A group of us got together one day and we said, all right, enough. You know, this kind of stuff should not happen. This is in the lake down a bit from my house near a dam that would flow into the Osable River. If you want to hit the next slide, I think it's probably the same as the one that's behind me. Yep. That's a picture I took behind my house in 2017. And as you can see, it goes for miles. This lake is about 5 miles long, and it goes for, as far as the eye can see. And maybe I think there's one more. If you could go to the next one. That's the foam on a beach. And the long and the short of it is, because the community came together and it was an amazing show of unity from our community, the state did a health study and actually found that, surprise, surprise, it's really harmful, even particularly for little kids. And they issued an advisory for our lake saying, don't touch this foam. Well, when they did that, we said to them, well, wait a second, folks. This foam doesn't just show up in little old Oscoda, Michigan. This is a whole lot of other places. And so after another 2 years of fighting, the state issued a statewide advisory, which I suspect probably very few of you in the room are even aware of. If you see white foam, and it doesn't have to be piled up like this. These are some more dramatic examples. If you see white foam, even like soap suds type foam, you shouldn't touch it on any water body in the state of Michigan. And what we did in our group is we started encouraging people from around the state to take pictures of foam when they see it. And because of that, we forced Eagle to kind of adopt a database. So they're keeping track of every place these foam sightings occur. And frankly, they're virtually everywhere. I have a friend who has a place on a lake that's kind of in the middle of nowhere. And I remember him saying to me, oh, that's not going to happen. I don't have to worry about that at my place. Well, I got COVID and I had to go stay at his place because I couldn't be with my family. And I started taking pictures and I said, yeah, you have it here too. So it's all over the place. And if you'll go to the next slide, I'll give you a kind of an example of that. This was taken in Detroit, in the 48217 zip code. This is near the Marathon refinery there. This was in 2018 or 19. I can't remember the exact year, but all of a sudden this foam started showing up. They had to close the highway for 2 days. And if you want to go to the next slide, you can see how it goes across the highway there. And then to the next one, how badly it was flowing from that Marathon plant. And what happened, and again, because I know you've been through these fights like I have, when this initially was discovered, I talked to a reporter from one of the Detroit, TV stations, and they said, what do you think this is? I said, you know what, they need to test this, but it sure looks like PFAS foam to me, because I've seen a lot of this all over the place. And so they did test it. And guess what? They didn't bother to tell people what they found, because between the time they first discovered this foam and when they tested it, they just sprayed it down the drains into the sewer system. Well, what they found was that this had PFAS at over 800,000 parts per trillion. Remember I told you there's no safe levels? Well, this was through the roof and it went right down the sewer system into the Detroit River. So my point here is that this stuff is everywhere. And if you would go to the next slide, I can share with you So in 2018, the Department of Environmental Quality held a kind of private meeting with environmental contractors across the state. They didn't invite the public to it. But at that meeting, they released to the contractors a list of the potential PFAS sites in the state of Michigan. So as you can see here, that's over, if you tally them all up, that's over 11,000 sites. We have today in Michigan confirmed about, it's about 280, 290 sites so far, and the number is growing. And if you want to go to the next slide, you can see some dots on the map. You can see the fire stations. There's a lot of them, 1,487 major airports. There's 27 of those. And if any of you might have seen in the news recently that Attorney General Nessel just sued the Grand Rapids, the Gerald R. Ford Airport in Grand Rapids from PFAS contamination. Military sites in Michigan, that's next. There's 104 of those, and we're one of those. And you can see those are, not just out in the country, but right around the Detroit area as well. If you could move to the next slide. Yeah, so we have refineries, petroleum bulk stations, petroleum terminals, quite a number of those. If you could move to the next slide. Active landfills, Superfund sites, old landfills, almost 2,000 old landfills, and you can see they're pretty much everywhere. If you go to the next slide. So we have electroplaters, and platers and polishers, and I want to tell you that the plating industry, and that's these three here, is notorious now for using these chemicals, and it is responsible for. There's a do not eat advisory for the Huron River in the Ann Arbor area in southeast Michigan. The Ann Arbor drinking water system is also impacted by PFAS chemicals. And the city of Ann Arbor, to its credit, has been doing a lot to try to, filter PFAS chemicals out of the water system there. If you could maybe go to the next one. So wastewater treatment plants, another notorious site, a place for PFAS contamination. And what happens is that it concentrates in the sludge. And guess what they do with the sludge? That's the next picture on my slide. The sludge goes to what they call, nope, go back. Please go back one more. Yeah, where it says biosolid sites. Well, biosolid sites is a nice way of saying farms. So what happens with the sludge from the wastewater treatment plants is that it is spread as fertilizer on farms all across the state of Michigan. As you can see, there's a total of 6,679 farms in Michigan at that time that were using sludge as fertilizer for their crops. And I believe it was last year, the very first farm in Michigan in Livingston County was shut down. The farmer was put out of business because his farm was contaminated, his cattle and livestock were contaminated, and they shut him down. And what they've told this farmer is that he's the only one in the state that has this problem. Now, 6,679 sites and he's the only one doesn't make any sense at all. You can see on this slide, there's some other sources. Footwear manufacturers, the Wolverine Worldwide company over in the Grand Rapids area has created major pollution over there. There have been lawsuits and all sorts of things that are going on there. Superfund site, not Superfund, CERCLA is, the EPA is involved. Furniture manufacturers, carpet manufacturers, because it's used as a stain resistant, car washes, scrap tire fires. And folks, the one thing they've left off here is, it's used as firefighting foam. Well, every place there's ever been a fire, we know this in Oscoda, is a PFAS site, because not every place there's ever been a fire of any type, but many fire departments, virtually all of them, use PFAS firefighting foam in their operations. So if that was used to put out a fire, a house fire, a store fire, there's a very high probability that the ground there is still contaminated. In Oscoda, that was done at in some what was vacant property at the time in the National Forest. The school system built the grade school, the middle school, the high school, and the sporting facilities on top of where that fire occurred. Drinking water in that school was impacted. And so this, I think, gives you a sense of the broad and widespread nature here. We know that 1.9 million people as of 2018 or 19 in Michigan who relied on municipal water systems for PFAS were exposed to PFAS contamination. With the drinking water standard that the state of Michigan adopted, actions are now being taken to stop that. But we have to remember that in Michigan also, I believe about a quarter of the population is served by private drinking water wells. And so to do the investigative work to figure out, if your well's safe or not safe, that's very, very problematic. So I guess I want to kind of open it up here and not just kind of drone on here, but what we've done as a result, Oscoda was really, ground zero here in Michigan. We know, for example, it's in the Flint River. There's another place that we know that it exists. But what we've done is Oscoda has organized, and we've got an incredible team there of scientists who volunteered their time to help us. We've done some very, very incredible things. And what we learned very quickly was, we can't, none of us, I'm sort of making a plea to you, none of us can operate in isolation. If we just allow individual communities to try to fight this fight on their own, it is very, very difficult to do. We need to come together, the communities around the state, and tell the state government and the federal government that we're not going to stand for this. And so myself and my friend Sandy Wynn Stout from the Grand Rapids area formed what's called the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network. It's a network of impacted communities around the country. I believe that there's some materials there for you to take a look at, but we have some really good information, and we have people all around the state and all around the Great Lakes region now who have joined our group, and we've been able to do some really cool things, and I'll talk to you about that real quick. But one other thing I want to tell you is that the Great Lakes are threatened in a very, very major way by PFAS. PFAS has been found in all of the Great Lakes, every single one of them. There has been, the state of Minnesota has issued an advisory for Lake Superior. Don't eat any smelt from Lake Superior. We also know from my scientists in our group, based on the scientific work that has been done by the EPA, that if those standards are applied as they should be to fish in Michigan, our fish standard in Michigan is 11 years old. Boil water doesn't work. Sorry, I saw that in the comment. Boiling doesn't take it out. What we know is that there are virtually no fish in the Great Lakes that are safe to eat because of PFAS contamination. It's a very, very stunning development, and I think the farm thing is going to blow up here in the coming years. I think that the fish thing is going to blow up as well, because right now it's being kind of suppressed because of the commercial impacts that it can have. So anyways, I'll wrap this up real quick. In Oscoda, what we have tried to do is to partner with our members of Congress. And I'm a strong proponent of PFAS, of working the political system to bring about change. And the next slide, I want to show you, we've been fighting the Department of Defense in Oscoda for 13 years. They have been virtually impossible to deal with. And we went to the White House. I wrote a letter to the White House in 2021 saying the Department of Defense is misleading you. You've been issuing statements that are false. And to the credit of the Biden administration, they called me and they said, we want to work with you. We're sorry. And as a result, and working in conjunction with Dan Kildee, our congressman from Oscoda, who's from Flint, as you know, he's no longer our congressman because of redistricting, but our Michigan congressional delegation. And I want to put out a big shout out to Alyssa Slotkin, who's been hugely helpful to us. I sat down with the Undersecretary of Defense at the Pentagon last March. And he said to me, what do we need to do? I said, you need to develop a strategic plan to attack this problem. In July of 2023, the Assistant Secretary of Defense issued this memorandum. And I'm going to tell you, folks, I was stunned to find out that they did exactly what I asked them to do. It is in its very early stages, but the first effort to implement it is happening in Oscoda as we speak. So I'm going to put up the last slide and then open it up for conversation and discussion. This is a shout out to this film that was made about our situation in Oscoda. It's called No Defense, the U.S. Military's War on Water. As you can see, it's won all sorts of awards. I believe there's information available as to how you can watch this. It is, when you get done watching this film, it was done by Sarah Ganem, an investigative reporter, formerly with CNN and worked on with Carl Bernstein there. You will come away ready to take action immediately. But I strongly encourage you to watch that if you want to learn more about PFAS and the struggle at Oscoda, kind of as ground zero for military sites, and in Michigan as well. It tells a lot of the history of PFAS in Michigan. Anyways, let me kind of stop there. I probably went a little longer than I'd anticipated, but there's a lot of ground to cover. Hopefully, this has been helpful for you, and I hope that if you have questions or issues you want to bring up, maybe we can chat about those in the minutes that remain here in this discussion.